All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I hope that you're having a splendid Saturday evening. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable this gathering to be in our scale of good deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you for the time that you spared for His sake. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to exit from this gathering with hearts more steadfast on the path, more loving of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, more following of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Ameen ya rabbal alameen. And welcome. This is our second session in a series of sessions where we kind of dive into reflections about Hajj. And we are reflecting about Hajj in a way that hopefully touches our lives here, even though maybe some of us did not get the chance to go yet. We hope that those that did not get the chance to go to be blessed with the opportunity to go, inshallah. We ask that Allah enable that to happen, facilitate for it to happen, inshallah. And if anybody has gotten the chance to go, then they can perhaps even add into the discussion, inshallah. Once we open the floor for comments and reflections and questions, inshallah, at the end. And it's an open Q&A time too as well. Like if you have any questions about any matter, inshallah, we're here to try to discuss those and help address them, inshallah. All right, to recap, last time we touched upon two verses in the Quran specifically that deal with Hajj, right? That talk about Hajj, and they are from Surah Al-Hajj. And we touched upon how that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Hajj as an opportunity, right? There's a very beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, إِنَّ لِلَّهِ فِي دَهْرِكُمْ لَنَفَحَاتٍ فَتَعَرَّضُوا لَهَا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during your lifetime will present to you with gushes of wind, if you like. Nafahat can be translated literally as gushes of wind, but also to opportunities, right? Gifts and chances and opportunities for us to return to Allah, to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet says, فَتَعَرَّضُوا لَهَا, subject yourselves to these opportunities. In other words, relish these opportunities, enjoy them, seize the moment, right? Seize these moments that Allah blesses us with. We are required to seize them, make use of them, make the best of them to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hajj is one of those seasons where we are given the opportunity to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And last time we touched upon how that the very interesting phrase that says يَأْتِينَ مِن كُلِّ فَجٍّ عَمِيقٍ in the verse, that literally kind of translates to they will come to you from every deep corner or every faraway place. That's kind of the translation. And the meaning that we took, a comment about that was that Fajj usually means a crack, and amiq means deep, so deep cracks. So meaning that people will come even from the deep cracks, meaning even if they have fallen through the cracks because of neglect or shortcomings or pitfalls. And this happens. It's even an expression that we use in English when we say that, you know what, my tasks, some of them fell through the cracks, right? I was negligent of some of my tasks and some of them fell through the cracks, meaning they were forgotten and lost. So even people that were forgotten and lost, they forgot themselves and they lost themselves, maybe to sin or to disobedience, even they will come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Hajj. Even they will, listen to the call, to the invitation to Hajj. And this kind of highlights the point that, as long as we're living, we have the opportunity to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet says, he says that Allah will accept the repentance of the servants as long as we are not in our last breath. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَقْبَلُ تَوْبَةَ الْعَبْدِ مَا لَمْ يُغَرْغِرْ. As long as you're breathing and you're alive, your repentance is accepted. And so the door to repentance is always open. The door to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always open. We touched upon, just how Hajj is an opportunity to purify our hearts and to, come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so today, inshallah, we'll touch upon some specifics related to Hajj, right? And today's kind of topic or, title is actually the Zuhd of the Hujjaj, right? The Zuhd of the Hujjaj. And we'll touch upon what does Zuhd actually mean and how do the Hujjaj, meaning the pilgrims, how do they exemplify this meaning and embody it through the rituals of Hajj? And how can we, miles away, also exemplify and practice this understanding and this concept, the concept of Zuhd, and what does it mean and how is it beneficial to us? So we'll try to address some of these concepts today very, very briefly, subhanAllah. The first thing that we want to touch upon is actually one of the conditions for Mu'tamirin and Hujjaj, meaning for those that are performing Umrah and for those that are performing Hajj. It is one of the pillars, if you like, of the rituals, and it is called Ihram. Now, ihram is sometimes used to describe the clothing that is worn specifically by men, right? Where they wear two pieces of cloth, one around the waist, right, covering all the legs, and another around the shoulders. right? And so these two pieces of cloth are sometimes labeled ihram, but ihram is not just those two pieces of cloth. It's actually more than that. It's actually a state, and the word ihram comes from haram, which means prohibited. So it's almost like entering into a state of prohibition, a state of sanctity, a state of sacredness, right? And ihram, subhanallah, it requires two things. It requires an intention, and it requires that you actually do, rid yourselves of certain comforts of life. And so the intention is made that we're entering into the state of ihram, and then you wear the two pieces of cloth. When it comes to men, when it comes to women, they wear the proper hijab, and they're only allowed to show their hands and face. Hands and face. In fact, scholars also say that the niqab is also not permitted during the state of ihram. So they're not supposed to be covering their faces anymore if they were wearing the niqab. This is a time where in the state of ihram, they actually are showing their faces and showing their hands, and they're not allowed to wear gloves and not allowed to cover their faces anymore, subhanAllah. So that's the state of ihram. That's the clothing of ihram, if you like. And the intention is simply an intention, right? It's not, it doesn't have to be said out loud, but it could be, right? But it doesn't have to be. And basically, it is, oh Allah, I intend to perform Hajj, or I intend to perform Umrah, right? And labbaik Allahum, they use the word labbaik, meaning I'm responding to your call. And typically the Hujjaj and the Mu'tamirin, people that are visiting the Haram, visiting Mecca, they use this phrase, right? They say labbaik Allahumma labbaik, meaning to you we respond, Ya Allah, to you we respond. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, right? And then they say labbaika la sharika laka labbaik. To you we respond, there is no partner to you. To you we respond. Inna alhamda wa ni'mata laka wal mulk. All praise is to you, and all blessings come from you, and all kingship and ownership belongs to you, right? La sharika lak, there's no partner unto you. So this phrase is used, this is called the talbiyah, and it's used by the Hujjaj as they embark on their journey, as they actually are, from the moment they intend to, and they enter into the state of ihram, all the way until they actually reach the haram, until they see the Kaaba and they're there before the Kaaba, and that's when they start making dua, and the talbiyah is no longer required of them, right? And so where is it that this intention is made by the Hujjaj? It is made in what is known as the miqat. And the miqat is basically certain points around Mecca, right? Certain points around Mecca. There are certain places around Mecca. So the Prophet, entered into the state of Ihram in the miqat, in one of the miqats, when he was coming from Medina, right? And he specified where the miqat is for those that are coming from the south. So if you're coming from Yemen, or coming from the south, or coming from the west, or coming from the east, there's always a miqat, because it kind of creates this circumference right around Mecca, wherein once you reach that area, those miqat, that place, you now are required to enter into the state of ihram. And so you have to, for men, they have to take off their clothing and wear the two pieces of cloth, which is two pieces of cloth that they use. There are no, belts. There are some belts now that are used, right? But back then they didn't have belts. And now they use belts to make it easier a little bit, and they have like pouches and make sure that none of these belts have stitches, right? So there's that. But some people like to be original and not have these belts, right? And but the point is that you're wearing two pieces of cloth. No longer are you wearing socks. No longer are you wearing shoes. No longer are you wearing underwear. No longer are you wearing pants. No longer are you wearing shirts. All of that is gone. Subhanallah. It's a very simple kind of attire. And so we find this, ihram is a very interesting, way of dressing. And it is very uncomfortable, actually, right? Somebody wearing it for the first time, they find themselves very uncomfortable because they're used to, wearing certain clothing and, being comfortable in certain clothing, and maybe culturally they're used to it. All of that is put aside. All the comforts, the culture, the colors, the dress codes, all of that is put aside, subhanAllah. And now they're wearing two pieces of cloth, which, for the one person wearing it for the first time, they're worried. Is it something is it tight enough? Are they holding it well enough? Is it, is it safe? Is it secure? They're worried for themselves, right? And so it is a bit uncomfortable, especially at the beginning. But then, slowly but surely they get used to it, subhanAllah. And so now they're in a state of ihram. they've made the intention, they were at the miqat, they haven't reached Mecca yet, right? There's kilometers to go, and they, people, for example, that are arriving in Jeddah that plan to go to Mecca, and so they arrive, the plane lands in Jeddah. Before they land in Jeddah, you will find the announcement saying that, we're arriving in Jeddah, now you need to wear the ihram, change clothing and enter into the state of ihram before landing in Jeddah, because Jeddah is actually inside the circumference or the area of miqat. So you find people before boarding the plane, they will change into, like if they're coming from a Muslim country, usually you'll find them before getting on the plane, they will change their clothing and make the intention. Others might be on the plane and they go to the washroom or the bathroom in the plane and change there and make the intention before arriving in Jeddah. And so the intention is made. The intention is to enter into a state of ihram. The state of ihram has a few requirements as well. Like there's the requirement of you cannot now use any scented materials, right? You can't use perfume. You can't use soap. You can't use you're not supposed to be using anything that is scented. Now, soap, there's a bit of difference of opinion about it. Some say that its primary purpose is cleaning, not necessarily having a scent or giving a scent. And so they say that because that's the primary purpose of it, you can use it, but that's a minority opinion. The majority opinion says, avoid soaps because, it's naturally, generally scented. Even after using the soap, you have a scent on you, and so you're not supposed to be putting any new scents. Now, what if before wearing the ihram, you put scents on? That's fine, right? So before ihram, you find people, putting deodorant, putting perfume, right? And they make sure that the deodorant or the perfume doesn't come on the two pieces of cloth, right? Oily perfume, for example, like they don't want any oil spills on the two pieces of cloth. And so now they're wearing this very simple clothing. Even women as well, they don't typically wear different colors and whatnot. They try to wear a simple hijab, simple coloring, usually white, sometimes black. But point is that it's very simple, and there's simplicity all around, right? Simplicity all around. And like I said, you can shower, you can perform wudu for sure, but you are not supposed to be using soaps or shampoos or perfumes or deodorants or anything that is scented. And so in a way, a lot of things that we take for granted and use for our own comforts, they are sacrificed and they're set aside. And for Mu'tamir, for somebody that is performing Umrah, it's very easy because Umrah itself, like the whole Umrah journey, takes maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours maximum, right? And so it's just a few hours, right? But Hajj takes days, right? Hajj takes days. And so for the Hujjaj, it is quite a number of days wherein, they're avoiding scented materials and avoiding soaps and perfumes. So it gets to be a little bit difficult. But we want to reflect on a few things. We want to reflect on the clothing, the simplicity of the clothing. The idea here is that you are putting aside, the clothing that you maybe find comfort in. You're putting aside your comforts. You're sacrificing your comforts. And it's not always that we do this, right? But sometimes we need to sacrifice comforts. And when we sacrifice comforts, we realize that there are more important things to life, right? There are more important things to dressing nicely. There's more important things to our existence than our own comforts. And it goes against, actually, if you think about it, what most people do. When people live their life, often label it the pursuit of happiness. But what they really mean is the pursuit of luxury, the pursuit of comfort. And in fact, they even say if somebody's living a lavish lifestyle, perhaps has a mansion and has a fleet of cars and has a yacht and, travels in the summer all the time. And, a wealthy person, what do they call them? They say that they're living large, right? And so life is usually attached to, extravagance and lavishness and comforts and relishing and enjoying these comforts. But that's not for the Muslim. Muslim life is not about living large. It's not about the comforts. It's not about the luxuries. It's not about the extravagances. In fact, for the Muslim, life is simply, as the Prophet says, والسلام, مزرعة الآخرة, right? الدنيا مزرعة الآخرة, the farmland for the hereafter. And so the saying that says, as you sow, so shall you reap, or you reap what you sow, the idea is that we will plant good deeds in this life and reap them in the hereafter. And this is what this dunya is all about. And so the whole, experience of wearing or being in a state of ihram and wearing the two pieces of cloth and shedding aside or putting aside, many of the comforts of this world, this whole experience exemplifies and symbolizes the idea of putting aside the comforts and luxuries of life and sacrificing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we do this often, by the way, like it's not only in Ihram, we also do it in Ramadan, where we set aside comforts, right? In Ramadan, we don't have our regular coffee, we don't have our regular breakfast, we don't have, a regular routine, even sleep cycles are disrupted in Ramadan. All of that sacrifice is made for a reason. And it's not to put us through pain and suffering, like that's not the point. The point really is the outcome of it, and that is the detachment from this dunya. And that is what Zuhd actually is, right? Zuhd is to attach yourself to al-akhirah and detach yourself from this dunya. And by detach here, I don't mean to separate and sever connections, right? Because the connection will always be there, but to make it a weaker connection, not a strong one, right? Where dunya is not in our hearts, but it's in our hands. And we can easily let go of it. Think of somebody that has some wealth. It's wealth that they worked hard for. They put sweat, tears, maybe even blood to attain that wealth. And it's halal income, inshallah, so it's their money. They can spend it as they please. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that not just that, we should actually spend it in ways that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and use what we need to, attain our own personal comfort, right? To within certain limits, of course, not crossing the line into extravagance, into israf. And then all that is extra is actually something that we should use to help alleviate the hardship of others. And so we find the believing Muslim who has wealth uses that wealth to alleviate the suffering of others. So they take money out of their pockets, right, and give it to someone that is less fortunate, less privileged, in need, going through hardship. And so how do they do this? They do it easily because it's not in our hearts. If it's in their hearts, it'll take a lot of effort to extract that dunya from their hearts. But it's in their hands, they can easily let go of it. And also, if push comes to shove, if somebody's put in a situation where dunya conflicts with al-akhirah, meaning that you may attain a lot of wealth, a lot of power, a lot of worldly gains, but it will come at the expense of your akhirah, meaning you will suffer in the hereafter. You'll disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to attain that wealth, to attain that fame, to attain that glory, and the disobedience of Allah will lead to a life of suffering in the hereafter. So there's a conflict between al-dunya and al-akhirah. When such a conflict arises, and it will arise many times in our lives, when that happens, what do we choose? Do we choose dunya because it's right before our eyes and it's very shiny and very attractive, or do we choose al-akhirah? And so a person that has al-akhirah in their hearts, that's what they care about, that's their main concern. Easily they will let go of the dunya, right? They will drop it. You know what? I had the opportunity to get that wealth, to get that power, to get that fame, to get all that worldly glory, but I'm going to let go of it. Why? Because it conflicts with al-akhirah, and al-akhirah is my priority. And so they let go of it. That's zuhd, right? That's zuhd. And it's a very powerful concept to think about. And so this is what the ihram actually teaches us. It teaches us here, even though we're miles away and maybe we didn't get the chance to perform Umrah or to perform Hajj, and we're here, yet we learn from this experience as well. We learn that we need to distance ourselves from this dunya as well. We need to take a few steps back. We need to not allow ourselves to be knee deep into the dunya, so attached to it, right? It's very interesting because one of the things that they accuse the Gen Z with is this attachment, this entitlement, right? They say that the new generation is so entitled, and so this entitlement happens because they've been raised on a silver spoon, as they say, right? They've been raised in a way where everything they want is readily available, and so we live in a day and age where everything is readily available at our fingertips. And we can just order everything that we want. We can Uber Eats everything, the food will come right to our door. We can Prime everything, it will come to our doorstep within a few days. There's people that are working on something called Prime Now, that we just order right then and there. It will come at your door. It'll just happen instantaneously, really quick, within a few hours maybe. And so the idea here is that we're used to having everything that we want readily available, especially when we live here in the West, like that's the case. But if that doesn't happen, if we face hardship, difficulty, maybe some challenges, if what we want doesn't happen, we become frustrated and we become upset and we become saddened because we didn't get what we want. And that is because, unfortunately, many of us are entitled in our current day and age. We've been living, deprivation happens, and it will happen because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we'll be tested with deprivation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ, right? We'll be tested with some deprivation and some loss. And so we recognize that, loss will happen, deprivation will happen. And so when that happens, when we're tested with some fear or some loss or some deprivation or some, we have to be ready for it. You shouldn't get this feeling of entitlement and feel that, I'm entitled to this. And so we become so upset when it doesn't happen, so frustrated, so angry, so anxious. And that's not the Muslim. The Muslim recognizes, okay, deprivation happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed otherwise. I had certain plans, certain dreams, certain hopes. They didn't happen. They didn't happen in a certain way. I recognize that I did my best and I will continue to do my best, but the results are in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I'm content with what Allah has written for me. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mean being content as in not to have aspirations. I don't mean not to be upset, because it's natural to be upset. But I mean, don't allow that feeling of being upset to reach such an extent that it cuts so deep that it leads to, internal bleeding, right? Don't allow it to reach a point where it becomes despair, where you lose hope and you're frustrated and angry at what Allah has ordained, to the extent that you start yelling, "Why, Allah, do you make this happen to me?" Right? That's what I mean. So we need to have this certain rida, certain contentment when we face deprivation. And so what ihram teaches us and those that are performing it, those that are entering into the state of ihram, it teaches them to set aside the dunya, right? Now they're wearing uncomfortable clothes. They're in a uncomfortable state, and they've put aside the comforts, the luxuries of life. And this is, by the way, just one step in the zuhd of the Hujjaj, in the zuhd of the pilgrims. Zuhd, by the way, is very hard to translate. That's why I'm using that. But it is highlighted in the sacrifice that is made by the Hujjaj as they embark on the journey of Hajj. The other thing that the kafan the ihram symbolizes is the kafan. What is a kafan? Kafan is actually a piece of cloth that the dead body is wrapped in. Right. And actually in English, we use the word coffin. It usually means a box, like a wooden box that maybe have all this kind of ornaments on it and whatnot. And so that's the English, way of, or the Western way of burying somebody. But in the Muslim world, a box isn't used. It's just a piece of cloth. That piece of cloth is called a kafan. And the two pieces of cloth that are used by the Hujjaj and by the Mu'tamirin, by the people that are pilgrims that are traveling, all the way to perform Umrah or to perform Hajj, that two pieces of cloth, that kind of symbolizes the kafan as well. Because in the end, when we come to become buried into the ground, we're actually not going to take all the wealth, all the wardrobe, all the different shoes, all the different pairs of this or pairs of that, all the different suits, all the different clothing that we kind of, value and give so much weight for today. All of that will not be taken with us to the grave. We won't take a suitcase filled with cash. Like, we're just going to go into the grave on our own, all alone, only wrapped in a piece of cloth. And that's it. And subhanAllah, so it is also a reminder of death. And when we remember death, something interesting happens. We remember that this life is temporary. This life is not the be-all, end-all for Muslims. Now, for a non-Muslim that does not believe in the afterlife, for them, this life is the be-all, end-all. And so they're in this state where they actually use the slogan YOLO, right? You only live once. This life is it. That's all we care about. That's all we worry about. But for a Muslim, this life is simply temporary. It is simply for the hereafter. And if you imagine yourself going to the ocean, right? Let's say you go to the Atlantic or to the Pacific, right? These are the two, seas that are around us, the two large oceans that are around us here in Canada. You go to, and you see the ocean extending all the way to the horizon, and it is humongous. It is huge. Now imagine you had a needle, and you picked up with that needle, you just dipped it into the ocean. You picked up a drop from the ocean. That drop is dunya compared to the ocean of the hereafter, which is the existence in the hereafter. And so that drop is what we unfortunately focus so much about, and we're worried, how will I get from this point to that point? How will I graduate? What will happen when I graduate? What will happen when I get married? What will happen when I have children? What will happen when I do this? What will happen when I do that? Right? All of these different things that we worry about in dunya, they're in that small drop. But imagine the ocean of eternity in the hereafter, subhanAllah. And so for a Muslim, we don't give too much weight to that drop, right? And I don't say no weight, right? Because Zuhd for a Muslim is not to be a hermit, right? And that's what a hermit is somebody that has no need for dunya whatsoever. And they live only for the hereafter, or they live only, they've shunned all the pleasures of life. They've shunned everything. That's not something in our deen. In fact, this is what is called in the Quran a monkship, right? And a hermit-like life that has been innovated. It's not part of our deen. In a very interesting story that we'll touch upon about this, kind of comparing somebody that is, recognizing Zuhd in its true form and somebody that is shunning this life and living, for example, their whole lives in the masjid and not seeking a career or not having a job or not seeking an education, right? The difference between the two is somebody that has neglected their duties and has lived a life of imbalance versus somebody who does these things, but he does them for the right reason, right? He seeks an education, he has a career, he has a family, he does it all for the right reasons, and that is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time, none of this dunya is in their hearts, it's in their hands, right? So that's the difference between, a zahid and a rahib, right? Somebody that has zuhd and somebody that has this monk-like life. And so the story is of Salman al-Farisi, radiallahu anh, and Abu Darda, radiallahu anh. The two Sahaba were actually made to be brothers. You know how when the Prophet ﷺ, he arrived in Medina, he made a brotherhood and relationship, right, and sisterhood between the Muhajirun and the Ansar, the people that were new to Medina and people that were the original, kind of residents of Medina, right? So the newcomers, they didn't have homes, they didn't have places to live. And so one of the people that came to Medina before the Prophet arrived, and he lived as a slave for some time until he was able to free himself with the help of the Prophet and the Sahaba, actually fundraised to raise an amount to actually be able to, pay the price of the liberation of Salman. So Salman, he was originally a slave in Medina, and there's a longer story to that. But basically, he comes from Persia, and he was a slave, and he embraced Islam, and he was freed. But he was freed, and he was completely broke, like he had no home. So the Prophet made him be the brother of Abu Darda. That means Abu Darda would host Salman al-Farisi. So one day, Salman al-Farisi wakes up, and he sees Darda, right, the mother of Darda, the wife of Abu Darda, and he sees her kind of in a wrong state, like he sees her, kind of upset or worried, and she's not completely described, right, in the hadith, but he basically says, what's wrong? Like, is there something wrong? What's the matter? And she says to him that she just says that, Abu Darda, he doesn't have any need for a dunya. That's it. That's all she says. But Salman understood. He understood basically Abu Darda has neglected his family. He's neglected his home. So he decides to spend a little bit more time with Abu Darda. And he finds him, and then he spends some time with him, and then it was time for lunch. So he said, let's go eat. But Abu Darda says, well, I'm fasting. I'm not going to eat. I'm sorry. So Salman, who's not fasting, which gives you an idea this is not in Ramadan, he says, no, I'm not fasting, and I'm your guests, and I'm hungry, so I'll not eat without you. So let's go. You have to break your fast for me. So Abu Darda is like, okay, fine. So they go and they eat. And then when they eat, after a little while, it's nap time, it's sleep time, it's time to sleep. And so he goes to sleep. And although that, after a few hours, wakes up. He wants to perform Qiyamul Layl. Salman says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to perform Qiyamul Layl, nightly prayers. And Salman says, no, wait till the last third of the night and we'll rise up together and perform Qiyamul Layl together. So go back to sleep, otherwise I won't be able to sleep. So then Abu Darda goes back to sleep. And then they wake up, in the last third of the night and they perform Qiyamul Layl. And then right before Fajr, Salman says something to Abu Darda. He says to him, إِنَّ لِرَبِّكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, meaning your Lord has a right upon you. وَلِبَدِنِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, وفي رواية وَلِنَفْسِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, your nafs has a right over you. وَلِأَهْلِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, and your family has a right over you. فَأْعْطِ كُلَّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقًّا, give everyone that has a right over you their due rights. So this is what he says to Abu Darda. So Abu Darda takes this to the Prophet ﷺ at Fajr. They all go to pray Fajr with the Prophet ﷺ, and he shares this. He says, Salman told me this. What do you think about this, Ya Rasulullah? So the Prophet responds to Abu Darda, and he says, Sadaqa Salman. Salman has spoken the truth. Now what this hadith highlights, it highlights what true zuhd is all about. True zuhd is not about forgetting your family, neglecting your work, neglecting your own body, your own health, and spending time fasting all the time, performing qiyam al-layl all the time, performing nightly prayers all the time, right? Living in the masjid, right? That's not what zuhd is all about. In fact, there are people that have rights upon us, right? Our children, our family have rights upon us. Our parents have rights upon us. Our siblings have rights upon us. Our neighbors have rights upon us. Our society has rights upon us. And we have to uphold these rights. Our own body, our own health has rights upon us, right? This body that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with has a right upon us. And so to give each and every one of these its due right, that is the balance that the believer seeks. Now, it is, of course, very difficult to attain balance. In fact, it is, I would say, even impossible to be balanced in life because we're never going to be balanced 100%. That's just the reality. We're not angels, we're human beings, we will falter. And just as we walk on a fine line, imagine, somebody that's balancing themselves on a string, you'll find themselves tipping towards the left when they find their body going the other direction. They try to tip toward the left to rebalance themselves. And if their body tips a little too much to the left, they balance themselves to the right to regain balance. And they're constantly in that state, right? Going between left and right, swinging between the two, right? They're never completely balanced. And so that's our existence as well. We will always be tipped to one side or the other. For example, if somebody is going through crunch time at school, naturally, you're going to be spending more time at school, right? If somebody has parents that are maybe going through hardship or difficulty or sickness, naturally, you will spend more time with your parents. If somebody has siblings that need help, you'll spend more time with your siblings. If your friend is going through a tough time, you'll spend more time with your friend, right? Naturally, that's how we are in life. But the point is, we always are aware of the balance that we need to attain, and we don't sacrifice something completely, right? And that includes our ibadat, our rituals of worship, our acts of worship, right? And so this is why, by the way, Hajj is not a year-long event, right? It's just a number of days, ayam and ma'dudat, just a number of days in the year. What happens then the rest of the year? Well, we go about our lives and uphold our duties and responsibilities towards our family, towards our society, towards ourselves, towards everybody, right? The state of ihram is not a continuous state. It is a temporary state for a number of days, right? And so we realize that, you know what? We have to balance everything. Why did I mention this? Because true zuhd does not mean sacrificing dunya completely. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in a very powerful verse, He says, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. Do not forget your share of what? Of this dunya, right? Don't forget your share of this dunya. And the verse actually, to begin, it says, وَابْتَغِي فِي مَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةِ, right? Which translates to, this is in Surah Al-Qasas, seek the reward of the hereafter by means of what Allah has granted you. Meaning all the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, our health, our bodies, our wealth, our education, all the privilege, the gifts, the presents, these blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah has given it to us for a reason, not to enjoy, not to live this life, but to seek the reward of the hereafter through them, right? So when you come to study a certain career, you are studying in that career not to have a high-paying job so that you can live large. That's not the purpose. That may be the case for a non-Muslim, but for a Muslim, whether they live large or not, or whether they have a high-paying job or not, that's all secondary. What is primary is that they use that education to further their connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They use that education to alleviate the suffering, the hardship of others. They use that education to spread prosperity on the earth, imaratul ard, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala required of every servant of His, to spread prosperity on this earth. And so that's the first part of this verse. Seek the reward of the hereafter by means of what Allah has granted you. And then it says, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا, without forgetting your share of this world, right? And so when we talk about your share of this world, we do not mean, a very large piece of the pie, right? Imagine this situation where there's a pie that was brought, back home, and maybe you live with roommates. So you and your roommates will be sharing that pie. And so what do? You can take a large piece of the pie and give each of your roommates a small piece and say, this is for you, but this big piece is mine, right? And you probably won't finish that big piece. Maybe you don't really need that big piece, but you want it. And that's the difference between wants and needs, the difference between zuhd and falling into extravagance, right? And so, yes, you have a nasib, you have a share in this dunya. You take your share, inshallah, right? That is what you need, but don't cross it into extravagance and into extra luxury and extra comforts. And that is perhaps what you want, but it's not necessarily what you need. So ولا تنس نصيبك من الدنيا وأحسن كما أحسن الله إليك, and be excellent to others as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been excellent to you. Right? The translation says, be good and excellent to others as Allah has been good and excellent to you. And then it says, ولا تبغي الفساد في الأرض. Do not allow yourself to cross into corrupting the land. Right? When you are greedy and you want more than what your share is, you want more than what it is that you actually need, then you are going to be causing and spreading corruption. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like the corruptors. And so this is a very powerful verse that often only the small portion of it is quoted, right? That's the often quoted part. Don't forget your share of the dunya. If somebody, for example, sacrifices from their share, or maybe takes a small share, they're reminded of this. No, bro, don't forget your share of this dunya. Go nuts, they're trying to say, right? But that's not what the verse is about. Right? The verse is actually very clear in that we use the gifts Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we talked about a few things already. We talked about how that there is sacrifice when it comes to the ihram. We talked about how that the wearing the clothing in the ihram is actually a reminder of death, how that we will be only wrapped with it and buried into the ground, subhanallah, and how that we won't take any of the wealth, any of the riches, any of the comforts, any of the luxuries with us into the grave. It will not be taken with us. And the last thing that we'll touch upon is the concept of equality. And, subhanAllah, in this dunya, oftentimes we distinguish each other by how we dress, by how we look, by the type of car we ride, by the type of house that we have. We, unfortunately, that's just the materialistic way of looking at things. In fact, sometimes, unfortunately, a stay-at-home mother is looked down upon because she isn't a productive member of society. Like, you're a stay-at-home mom, that's all you do, you just stay at home. Right? You don't go out. You're not going to be, Fortune 500 CEO. Like, you're just a stay-at-home mom. In fact, sometimes that reaches to the extent that Khadija radiallahu anha is praised to being a Fortune 500 CEO. Like, she was a businesswoman. Why can't you be like Khadija, al-Mu'mineen radiallahu anha, right? Let alone that this was not really the case. She wasn't really a Fortune 500 CEO or anything. She was simply a shareholder in wealth, right? If you want to compare her to current day terms, right? But unfortunately, mothers and stay-at-home mothers and, stay-at-home wives are looked down upon. What are you doing? You're just staying at home? That's it? You're wasting everything, wasting your talents, and you're just staying at home? Why is that the case? Because the value that is given, unfortunately, in the Western world, in this materialistic world of ours, is a value of money, right? It's a value of wealth. And unfortunately, that's not the true value that we seek. I mean, yes, there's value in money, but it's not the only value. And it is, in fact, a limited value. True worth is in the contribution that we make as human beings towards each other. And so a stay-at-home mother that raises her children properly and ensures that the children are raised loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and following the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that is priceless, right? That is priceless, subhanAllah. It cannot be, compared, to millions that may be earned by becoming a Fortune 500 CEO, subhanAllah. And so, anyway, it was just a side comment, but the point is that we're talking about how that value is given to materialistic means. But what the ihram does, and how we dress so simply and that we look so much alike because we're all wearing the two pieces of cloth, especially the men, is that we have this be promoted amongst us. And this is something that actually was very much inspired Malcolm X, rahimahullah, when he went for Hajj the first time and the last time. So what happened? He actually went for Hajj and he saw that he dealt with people that had the whitest of skin, the bluest of eyes, the blondest of hair, but he felt with them a kinship, a connection, a brotherhood, an equality that was so unique that he said that Islam is the solution to the race problem in America. That if the white men in America were to consider Islam, it would remove the arrogance, right? The white supremacy that exists in their hearts. It would make them recognize that we are all human beings, regardless of our skin color, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of our backgrounds. And this is something the Prophet says himself in the farewell sermon. He says that there's nothing that makes the white person better than a black person, better than an Arab, إلا بالتقوى, right? Except by taqwa. لا فضل لعربي على أعجمي على أحمر على أبيض على أسود. Right? There's no favor for somebody for their skin color or for their mother tongue or for their ethnicity or for their background. right? All that distinguishes a person is their taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The noblest amongst you in the sight of Allah is the one that has true piety and God consciousness and awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and work hard to shield themselves from the wrath of Allah and attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this equality is a very powerful concept as well that the ihram teaches us. And so all of this, by the way, can be exemplified in the idea that we don't relish and don't consider dunya to be the distinguishing factor, right? It doesn't matter what car you have. It doesn't matter if you have a car or not. It doesn't matter what kind of clothing you wear. It doesn't matter if it's, name brands or not. It doesn't matter if you have a large house or a small house or an apartment, or it doesn't matter. All these things don't matter there. I mean, somebody that has these blessings might be more comfortable, but in the end, it doesn't make somebody better than the other. Really, what makes a person better than the other is only something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can evaluate, and that is the taqwa that is in our hearts. And so we realize here that Zuhd, and that's the concept of today, the Zuhd of the Hujjaj is the lesson for today, is something that Imam Ibn Qayyim touches on. I want to kind of share this quote. He says, وَالزُّهْدُ زُهْدٌ فِي الْحَرَامِ وَهُوَ فَرْضُ عَيْنٍ. He says that Zuhd, and I am not translating the word Zuhd, right? It is Zuhd of haram, meaning to stay clear of haram, of that which is prohibited. And it is fardu ayn, it is an obligation on every person. وَزُهْدٌ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ, and it is to stay away from الشُّبُهَات, meaning the matters that are not very clear cut. وَهُوَ بِحَسْبِ مَرَاتِبِ الشُّبْهَةِ, and it depends on the doubtful matter itself, right? The doubtful matters, they're not all the same. They come in degrees, they come in levels. So he says it depends on the level of the doubtful matter. فَإِنْ قَوِيَتْ التحقت بالواجب. If the doubt is strong about a matter, if a certain matter is very doubtful, then it becomes a wajib, meaning obligatory or required for the person to avoid this very, very doubtful matter, right? The doubt in it is very strong. وَإِنْ ضَعُفَتْ, but if the doubtful matter is weak in its doubt, meaning it's not very doubtful, right? The doubtfulness about it is weak. Then he says, كَانَ مُسْتَحَبًّا, meaning it becomes more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mustahabban, that's what mustahab means, to let go of it, right? And then he says, وَالزُّهْدُ فِي الْفُضُولِ. So 3 types of zuhds were mentioned so far. Zuhd when it comes to haram, meaning we steer clear from anything that is prohibited. That is a type of zuhd that is fardu ayn, that is obligatory upon every person. Then there's zuhd from the mutashabihat, zuhd from the doubtful matters, the gray area. And he says, Ibn Qayyim, that it depends on the level of doubtfulness. If the doubtfulness is very strong, then avoiding it could be actually obligatory. It is not very strong, meaning the level of doubt in the matter is not very strong, then it becomes better to avoid, more beloved to Allah to avoid, right? Mustahab. And then he said the third type is وَزُهْدٌ فِي الْفُضُولِ. Al-fudul is all the extra that we have, right? All the extra that we have. To have zuhd in all the extras that we have, that's the third type, right? Meaning that when you have extras, extra clothing, extra food, extra blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by extra here, that means it is beyond our needs, right? So he just says that this is a third type of zuhd, right? To actually let go of that as well. To let go of that, meaning to give it to those that may be more in need, right? And so we don't have to have, in fact, there was a very interesting documentary called Minimalism, right? Talking about living a minimalist lifestyle. Now, it doesn't have to be to that extent, right? But you don't have to have so many pairs of shoes, right? You don't have to have a large wardrobe, right? That's beyond your needs, right? So that's fudul, that's the extra. That's crossing the line into israf, extravagance, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes. إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like the extravagant. So he says, that's the third type. Then he says, وَزُهْدٌ فِيمَا لَا يَعْنِي مِنَ الْكَلَامِ وَالنَّظَرِ وَالسُّؤَالِ وَاللِّقَاءِ وَغَيْرِهِ. The fourth type of zuhd is zuhd to let go of that which is of not your concern. It's not about you, it's not for you, right? When it comes to speech, when it comes to looks, when it comes to asking, when it comes to meeting, and elsewhere, right? So that's the fourth type of zuhd by Ibn al-Qayyim. The fifth type of zuhd by Ibn al-Qayyim is وَزُهْدٌ فِي النَّاسِ, meaning that you shun and let go of people, right? And here, zuhdun fi nafs is basically what people have And so, oftentimes you find people that look at what people have and they become so attached to it. Look at that person. He has such a wonderful car. I'm going to get a car like that one day, right? Well, listen, you look at the suit that they're wearing, or look at this, or look at that. They always look at what people have and they become jealous, and they have this, unfortunate jealousy that wants and envy even sometimes, right? So, zuhdun finesse. Okay, what people have is what people have. I am not going to be worried or concerned about that. I'm going to completely let go of it, not even look at it, right? And that's the fifth type I said, right? The sixth type is وزهد في النفس بحيث تهون عليه نفسه في الله. This is a very high level of zuhd. The sixth level here, he says, zuhdun fi nafs, meaning that even yourself, right? Even yourself, you shun yourself, you sacrifice yourself. You're not even attached to yourself, right? SubhanAllah, at one point in time, the Prophet said to Umar ibn Khattab and to the believers, he says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما. So so the Prophet said that none of you is truly a believer until Allah and His Messenger are more beloved to them than anything else. So Umar, he was honest, right? He said, Ya Rasulullah, I love Allah and I love you more than everything else. إلا نفسي. Except myself. I love myself more. And so the Prophet then responded to him a very interesting response. He said, Hatta nafsuk, even yourself, even more than yourself. Right? It's a very interesting response by the Prophet to Umar. And then Umar thought for a while, like he didn't come back right away. He thought for a while. And then he said, Al-ana ya Rasulullah, hatta nafsi, even myself, ya Rasulullah. Like now, like after thinking about it, after pondering its meanings a little bit, I love Allah and His Messenger more than myself. And then the Prophet said to him, Al-ana, al-ana ya Umar. Now, Umar, meaning now you've attained true belief. So what does it mean to love Allah and His Messenger more than yourself? It means you take the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger more than you take your own whims and desires. Sometimes we reach a fork in the road and we want to go in a certain direction because that direction maybe is filled with flowers and it's lit up and it has nice lights and is a wonderful way. Maybe it will lead to wealth and prosperity, and maybe you think that it will lead to happiness. But Allah and the Messenger is telling you, no, don't take that route, right? These lights, it's just a facade, it's just an external image. That road will lead to hellfire. Don't take that road, right? But you don't see, you keep on looking like, but there is no hellfire. I can see, like, there's no, fire at the end of the road. Like, it looks nice, it looks fine. I want to go that route. I want to take that path. But Allah tells you, no, don't take that path. Take another path. So this is the moment where we actually are, questioning ourselves. Which way do we take? Do we take the route, the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for us, or do we take a different path? And so this is where we have to decide. And a true believer takes the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for them, not the route that they feel or love. In a very interesting hadith, the Prophet says, he says, حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. The path to Jannah is filled with hardships. The path to hellfire is filled with desires. And so we need to choose the path that doesn't have desires, that doesn't, suit our whims and desires, and recognize that the path that leads to Jannah is not going to be an easy path. It's going to be a difficult one. It will be filled with sacrifices. The last thing that Ibn Qayyim says, he says, وَزُهْدٌ جَامِعٌ لِذَلِكَ كُلِّهِ. There's a zuhd that includes all of that. وَهُوَ زُهْدٌ فِيمَا سُوَى اللَّهِ. And that is to not want, to shun, to set aside everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? وَفِي كُلِّ مَا يَشْغَلُكَ عَنْهُ. And everything that distracts you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Now, I don't want you to look at this quote by Ibn Qayyim and think that he's promoting that you live in the masjid, that work distracts you from Allah, that career distracts you from Allah, that school distracts you from Allah, that having a family distracts you from Allah. That's not true, right? All of these things are actually responsibilities and duties and things that we need as human beings. When you don't get married, for example, there's a piece of you that's broken, right? That actually is feeling pain. When you don't have a job, there's a piece of you that's broken. When you're not a parent, there's a piece of you that is broken. SubhanAllah, all of these things are human needs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them all in our hearts. Every human being has that need, SubhanAllah. The need to get married, the need to have children, the need to be part of a family, the need to be, a contributing member of society, the need to this, the need to that. These are needs, right? But when we do them, we need to do them as believers, as people that do them in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so true zuhd is, I love this quote by that's why I shared. And we will kind of stop here. We talked a little bit too much about Zuhd, but this is the idea. I want to end with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّنٌ وَالْحَرَامَ بَيِّنٌ. Halal is clear and haram is clear. وَبَيْنَهُمَا أُمُورٌ مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ. Between them are matters that are gray area, doubtful areas, right? And then he says that basically we are to avoid the doubtful areas. But he doesn't say it outright. He says, فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتِ فَقَدْ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ. The one that avoids the doubtful areas, the gray areas, they're actually announcing and declaring the innocence of their deen and the innocence of their honor. Istabra, that's what istabra means. They're seeking to declare the innocence of their deen and their honor. Istabra لدينه وعرضه. ومن ألا لكل ملك محارم وحمى الله محارم. Every king has preserved areas that they preserve and don't allow people to go into, and the preserved area of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what He has prohibited. And then he says that a person that goes around in the shubuhat يوشك أن يرتع فيه ومن يقوم حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه. The one that revolves around the haram, they're in the doubtful areas, gray areas all the time. They're very close to the border, crossing into the dark side, so to speak. They are very close to falling into what is prohibited. This hadith is encouraging Zuhd. Some scholars, some say that it actually is commanding Zuhd, that Zuhd is an obligation. But Ibn al-Qayyim, and I agree with him, he says that no, not all Zuhd is an obligation, right? There's the Zuhd that is an obligation, that is Zuhd from haram, obviously, right? You can, some don't call it Zuhd, but he calls it Zuhd, to shun that which is prohibited, obligation on every person. And he says that if the shubha is very strong, then it could be an obligation to avoid it as well. But if the shubha is light, then it's more beloved to Allah to avoid, right? Okay, so that is Zuhd, and that is our session for today. Anything good I said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Any mistakes on my own, I ask you to forgive me for it. And we'll open the floor for any comments, questions, thoughts, reflections that you may have, inshallah.
Brother Khalid. As the Imam mentioned, if you guys have any questions, you can either type it up or just unmute, and inshallah he will answer them, inshallah.
So I got a question here, actually, that is perhaps worth reflecting on. The question is, how do we work towards balance, right? Because that's something that a lot of people hope to attain. And the question is saying, how do we work towards balance? So first of all, there are a few things that we can do to try to attain balance. Number one is we need to realize that complete balance, 100% balance, is impossible. We're human beings. We have shortcomings. We are never going to be angels, right? So that's number one. Realize that perfection is impossible, but we can strive towards a balanced life. To strive towards a balanced life, you need to recognize what are the different aspects of your life that require your attention, right? And then plan for it, right? Like, dedicate time to it. So for most people, they have parents. That's part of their lives. Dedicate time to contact your parents. Unfortunately, you find so many people that may live a little bit far from their parents, and very rarely do they call their parents or ask about their parents or connect to their parents or check up on their parents, right? And it's very unfortunate, subhanAllah. We actually are commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to care for our parents and to be their companion with excellence. وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. To be, very good and kind in our companionship with our parents in this dunya. And, the very famous hadith where the angel Jibreel says that, if two parents have reached old age and there weren't a ticket for us to enter Jannah, right? That's somebody that missed out on such an opportunity. They lived till an old age and we were there, but we didn't make use of the opportunity to serve them, to be by their side, to help them out in their time of need, to be there for them, to ask about them, to connect to them. We missed out on all of that. And so we missed out on a very powerful way to enter into Al-Jannah, subhanAllah. So that's one aspect. So most of us, alhamdulillah, have parents. That's one thing to look out to and to look out for. So that is part of our lives. Siblings, we have siblings that we need to connect to and ask about and be involved in their lives and help out and advise, right? Once we have families of our own, our spouses, we need to be involved with our spouses and where are they going, what's going on in their lives, and not just, subhanAllah, many people, many couples, they grow apart because every person is kind of focused on their own lives, their own career, their own education, right, their own woes and worries, and so they grow apart. We need to, as couples, this is for those that are not married amongst you, and advice for those that are married, to make sure that you actually do, grow together and develop to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together. So spend quality time with family, whether it be your spouse or whether it be your children. The same applies to children. Why is it that children grow and then they're so far apart sometimes from us? Because we're so busy with our own lives and we forget that they have their own little lives that they, are worried about as well, and we grow apart. So to grow together means spending quality time with family. And then you have, your own school, your own education, your own career that you need to try to attain, so that you are, especially if you're a brother, because you are actually responsible for providing for your family. If you're a sister, your education, your career is something that you want to do so that you can be, inshallah, a contributing member of society, but so that you can be a better mother. So all of these things are part and parcel of who you are. Your body is something that you shouldn't neglect either. Your health, try to maintain it, try to be fit, try to maintain, that it's part and parcel of who you are and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. So these are all different aspects of your life. When you have these different aspects just written down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, these are different aspects of my life that I have. Some, lists may differ from others. Then you can actually start dedicating time to them. Plan things out. I'll call my parents, once a week if you live in a different place, or more often than that, and text them, be in touch with them. I'll call my siblings, I'll call my friends, right? All of that. Unfortunately, many people, they spend so much time with friends that they neglect family. And that's very sad, right? Again, that's part of the imbalance that many people choose. So balance is impossible, but you should strive to try to attain it by planning for it, inshallah, right? So do your best towards it. And if you rely on Allah, you do your best. Rely on Allah, rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again, make dua. Allah will facilitate for you to live a close to a balanced life, right? And it will not happen overnight. It will maybe take some time until you reach there, but plan for it, work hard for it, and never give up, right? And that's part of the struggle of life, that you will always be in that struggle of trying to maintain balance in life. There's a question here that says, how do you deal with guilt of not needing to repay immigrant parents for their sacrifices in terms of being successful in every worldly aspect? So I'm trying to understand the question. I'm guessing that there's guilt because of the need to repay immigrant parents because they sacrificed immensely by leaving their hometown and home country and coming maybe to Canada, and they want you, their child, to be, successful in every worldly aspect. And they think that that's the way to repay them for their sacrifices, because they sacrificed tremendously to come here. So trying to understand the question, I think that's the question. Correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, it comes down to this. Parents love their children. And this is, kind of a natural, fitri love, a love that comes from the fitra. But sometimes parents may be wrong in what they consider to be important for their child's development, for their child in general. But the fact that they may be wrong does not mean that they're horrible people. It just means that they may be mistaken, right? So some immigrant parents, they want their children to be wealthy. And in their minds, that is what success is, right? You got to be wealthy. And so what is the path that leads to wealth? Well, it's becoming a doctor or becoming an engineer, right? Oftentimes immigrant parents, they want their children to become engineers or doctors, not because of the positive effect it has on society, not because being a doctor is a very noble cause, right? Not because being an engineer is a great, career that could have very positive impact on society. It's often because of the status that it gives, like the social status it gives, and because of the wealth that comes with it, right? Like the high-paying job, high-paying salary. There was a person that joked that said that, oftentimes, and this is just a bit of a joke, but the joke was that sometimes, a sister that is very career driven, that has sacrificed family and sacrificed getting married and sacrificed having children and sacrificed all of that for her career because she's very driven for her career. Her excuse is that, it is to be a doctor. And because, we need women doctors and we need, women doctors to tend to women patients and whatnot, right? And the joke was, well, what if being a doctor was not a high-paying job? What if it was a low-paying job? Would the sacrifice still have been made? Like, in other words, would you have still sacrificed, family and getting married and having children for this career, even though it's a low-paying job? And he was just posing this question, like I said, a bit of a joke. But point is that unfortunately, we need to recognize that sometimes we put, noble, slogans, but the reality is what we're seeking is wealth. What we're seeking is power. And so if our parents or any parent has this understanding that wealth is what is, to be attained and that is what success is, we need to help them understand the truth that no, wealth is not really success, because there was the most wealthiest of person that was ever had the most powerful army, but he was a sore loser. It was Fir'aun. Wealth is not everything. Qarun was also very wealthy, but also a sore loser. So wealth is not everything. Wealth is important, but it's important to be attained with balance, by balancing our deen, for example. And so, we can never allow our careers, for example, or our education to affect our obligations towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to affect our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we need to kind of balance these things out, right? And so, like I said, wealth is important, but it's not the most important. So we need to clarify this slowly but surely with our parents and clarify that true success is success in the hereafter. That yes, there is worldly success in the dunya that's important, especially for a man, like I said, because they are the providers for the house, right? Women have a little bit more of leeway and freedom when it comes to that, a little bit more. But in our day and age, also, it's a bit of a struggle as well. So I understand that even for sisters, they also are pursuing their careers and whatnot. But point is that, that you are doing this, but you're doing it to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not doing it for wealth. You're not doing it for the power. You're not doing it for the fame. You're not doing it not for the social status, not for the high-paying salary. You're doing it for the impact. If you want to be a doctor, that's great, but be a doctor for the right reasons, right? If you want to be an engineer, that's awesome, but again, for the right reasons, not for the wealth, not for the fame, not for the glory, because these are wrong reasons. And so, it's fine to pursue these things, but recognize that there's no shame, there's no guilt in pursuing other career paths, as long as you are still, working hard to attain certain level of worldly success. And it's more about the impact that you make and the contribution that you make towards the ummah at large, so that you are a contributing member towards society, so that you are doing, using your skills in a way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And true success lies in the hereafter, wherein we hope to attain the highest level of Al-Jannah, and we strive towards that. All right, so there should be no guilt when it comes to this. In fact, it should be a matter of perspective that needs to perhaps be taught to some parents, and again, with a very polite way, in a very decent way, very excellent way of speech, without admonition. And sometimes it may take years, right? For parents to be on the same page with us. It may even never happen. In the end, once you're an adult, you're in charge of your own, horse, as they say, and you're held to account before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your own decisions. And no matter how much pressure people put, in the end, you have to decide for yourself what is it that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if parents are pushing you to displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's where you're saying no. If they strive against you to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it be work or career or wealth or power, anything that you associate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do not obey them when it comes to that, and clearly disobey them when it comes to that, and say, no, I will not put anything above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And so, these are just some words, some reflections. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Please feel free to share, inshallah.
If no one else has any more questions, we'll maybe stay here for another 30-ish seconds in case anyone thought of anything else, inshallah. But maybe afterwards we'll break off just so everyone can go pray Maghrib soon. So if anyone has any more questions, feel free. If not, I don't think there is any more in the chat either. I think we will break off here. Jazakumullah khairan for everything. The lecture was amazing. And inshallah, we'll see everyone in the next session, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.